on all existing, so all planes, all existing, all line positions all at once. What would that be like to be actually in that positions all levels? What would that be like to actually be in the reality of future lines existing all at once, everything happening all at once, off the clock and off the foundation, off the grounds, off the surface, all set position, location, highways and track correlates and modems and Wi-Fi satellites and towers. Knowing exactly who you are and where are you? Who am I? How do I identify myself? How do I understand myself? How do I get to understand where I am or where I've always been? Well, that's exactly where you come into that position. For you to identify that is to actually go back to the beginning. There is no beginning, there's no end, but you're identifying what you aren't. Is to identify the story that you never were. So the process in that is to go back to the beginning. It's like detective has to go back to the beginning to understand how to pick up the clues, right? And that's what a detective does. It goes back to the beginning. So that's what you guys are coming into now. Coming out of something that never was created. That process is communication setting your travels. So for you guys to identify that, it's going through upgrades. And it goes through all of your downloads, your uplinkings, your downgrading systems, and your uploading systems, right? All in one signal, one ground centers, one power, one atmospheres, one highway, one travel, one direct city location, your systems, right? So you're actually coming out of the dream itself that was never created, which is the game itself. Now, once you come into that position, you start understanding you're not in a game that you created, you are a game that you are you, of just existing and evolving. But you created something, okay, that you wanted to bring into existence, that you want to come into modifications, that you wanted to identify, but you can't identify until you identify you, and you can't identify that in a dream. You come out of the dream that never was the dream in the first place, which is the alteration of the dream. So the basic understanding is that once you get into that position, you come out of tractions. And once you come out of tractions, you come in lines of setting. Once you come into that position locations, everything that you created never existed. You prolong like nothing happened. Getting out of that trance puts you into the conscious how you put yourself in that trance in the first place. That's what you all come out of. So it's kind of like a conceptual setting like a Hollywood movie. You're coming out of something that was never you. Now, putting yourself in a trans-dimensional system is an interdimensional setting of a locking screen. You guys did that all together through three-dimensional mind. That process of communication mind alters the states and how you see yourself in tractions. By putting yourself together, embedded through an implantation and travel, because that's all you know. So there's no thinking in set positions. There's no activation lines of grounds and lines of surface. So thinking for yourself is cognitive location system, zesting, audience, and voyance, where basically you come into lines of screen adaptation. The mind doesn't have a consistency of knowledge. The mind is the creation of creating of its knowledge. The mind itself is the imagination of itself that puts everything all together, okay? But not through a story. The mind itself is just creating. Now you're creating stories, but there's no beginning, middle, or an end. But you're coming out of what you aren't is the beginning of what you are. It's just the existing of all platforms of future adaptations. And everything around you starts recognizing everything and setting. So you become more consciously aware of when you come into your phone or your computers, your TVs, right? That processes your system when you come into positions all levels, into your 12 DNA tractions. That brings you out of the trans-dimensional and puts you into the interdimensional multi-layers of you. That gets you into communications, how you start to see the 7 position, location, and travels in position lines of setting at 12 dimensions of space and time. Okay, space and time, not time and space. There's totally different lines of transaction location in your system. A mind that collaborates the settings to understand it through its operation of its cerebro. Now we already know what that is in line screen adaptations, but now we have to send the configures set in how to use all levels of a holographic system. Now understanding the coming into the 12 DNA, coming out of the story frame that never was you, you come into the story frame that is always you. It's just existing. You come into all levels of what you already see through creation, and you start to see everything in that position. You come into creating. And when you start creating, you're adding new. Okay? You're coming into a new job. Okay? You're coming into buying new clothes. You're watching a new movie. Okay? You can't do that in a story. Okay? See, the thing is, a TV show, anything, a TV show is an hour, right? And 45 minutes. And then if you're watching anything line screen adaptations of TBS or locations or anything lines to CTV or ABC or NBC or anything in that position of its network is processed in position of its story. Everything is moderated in its position. It runs its own system of a story. Everything is a story. And that's what you're coming out of. So the narrative of you isn't a story, but how you see yourself through story is through existing in a formation already of existence. So they get you to better understand how you come into your own narratives, how you see yourself. Okay, when you see everything around you in the VR system, or where you've always been, where you never left. Now processing that, that's where you get into more lines of more communications and less confusion where you are, living the cycles of 30 or 40 years of travel. Okay? So you've never been traveling. You've been locked in the mind. So in that position, when you start recognizing these things, so wait a minute, in that position, location, and system, my body's always been in the VR system? Yes. So all we're doing is putting you guys in a higher lines of sequence, position a panel, get you guys energized, get you out of your metabeds, get you out of awakening, processing your positions, bring you back where you left off before you put yourself in your trance. We energize your systems, and you prolong like nothing happened in your setting. Okay? The only difference is humanity will be in a 12 division and dimension of space and time. Operatives and units will be in 144 division, okay, of quadrants of space and time, okay, in direction. So we all have to understand how to come into that. Once we get into that, it's much easier so we can understand that everything around is all digital. And then you want to identify, how did I do this? That's the next level. The team and the units have to understand how to create a ground, panels, and a ceiling. Okay, and then process the 3 centers of travel. And then process lines of 6 lines of travel, 9 lines and 12 lines of travel. Okay, and understand how to create it through a structure of a building in set position. Okay, because everything around you is a holographic system, all through structure, all through design. Okay, but understand how you can constantly change the metric meters and scales of all communication system that puts you in gratitude in that location of travel. Okay, so try to get to understand how to go through all of us, how to get into holographic grounds is the platforms of communication of all line centers. Get into structure lines. So let's get into the alphabetical system of 4 settings. Okay, so we'll go through A, and we'll go through B, and we'll go through C, and we'll just go through basic lines A, B, C, and D. All right? All right, so we get A center, cross line signals, okay, and position all levels of D, right? B line centers off correlation setting and position of process calculation, right? So that's calculation screen. You change it this way, okay, into a location grid in a box frame, all right? So understand the holographic grid has to have a ground, has to have a power, and it has to have an atmosphere, and it has to have a highway of 4 settings. And that position in the process, energetic 1, energetic 2, energetic 3, energetic dome, and position of Earth. The process of communication setting is the ground lines of service, process line course setting transits over lines, set calculation modify, and line screen adaptation of holographic gridding and travel communications. Okay? Okay, so when you get into that, then you get into your platforms. Okay? You can cross angles, 45 lines, 4 cross location system, off through tractions, right? But it's all pixelated. It's all pixelated, right? So once you understand the pixelation lines, I'm just getting basic grounds in a 4-line signal. 4 lines of 1, 4 lines of 2, 4 lines of 3. You use your imagination, you're just coming back into that. So when you're coming out of the trance, you automatically come into the VR system and you get very confused. But then you understand, wow, okay, I'm starting to recognize now. My TV was pixelation grounds. I set a line screen adaptation setting. I set an A track over at least in the lines of level, line position all levels of space lines of anomaly. So I understand my TV now. I understand my table. I understand my grounds, step by step by step by step. But you got 30 years of signals that was never you in set position. That's very hard to get out of, okay, in that tractions, right? So when you guys are sleeping, this is 2 weeks in tractions, right, which is 14 years in setting space and lines of time and anomaly. Process calculates lines it to 1,000 feet, setting lines of 400,000 sequences. Setting grounds to calculate and modify in line screen adaptations. Processing the 12 DNA into 144 platform, right? So the operators and units are going to see 144 set tractions into the AVR system. But everything around them will no longer be line position locations and copy and paste. They actually will see everything into the AVR system, right? Which is more powerful. So when you're sleeping in that position, you're still going to process everything that you aren't. That's just surfacing out of your body, okay? So it's kind of like you're coming into decompressing, okay? Being underwater too long. You have to be in a decompressing chamber, so you can get back into your oxygen levels, so you get back into your avatar sequence, so you can get back into all levels of flux. Then you can get back into the atmospheres, into the stratospheres, the bio. Then you can start breathing into the VR system, all through traction. All right? But it's step-by-step procedures, guys, because you put yourself in that position. 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, right? That's a lot of transitions of transactions that come out of transdimensional space. Okay? So once you get a line of understanding how this all works, then you understand how its sequence lines, its panels, process, calculates, modify, directing line, ground center, location to its systems. All right. So I've got 3 provision lines of cycles, 3 track centers. You guys are going to put I'm going to put you guys on your moons. Moon centers, lines of center. Process centers, overline, sequence of the 3 lines of flux over screen. Okay. All right. Platitude here. Position of facility, compound, and 3 centers of travel, indirect signal lines and grounds. Okay. All right. So your moon surfaces outline tractions. Okay, you guys are in practice mode now. Okay, so we're going to holographic grid lines. So it travels in 3 grounds, centers of surface and travel communications. Okay, set in sequence, all right? And then we go through panels of operation and setting attractions, all right? And then we open line ground, centers of sequence into the moon of surface, all right? All right, so you guys have fun. You got 30 minutes on hours and sequence lines and set location and settings, minutes on seconds, and seconds on frame. All right, so I'm back charging the setting lines of travel. So it's direct and redirect. Direct and redirect is a line state location that you have to understand how to communicate to your system, because once you come into your AVR system, you have to recognize everything through a hologram. And it gets a lot less confusion because you start to recognize how you created it through pixelation in itself, right? Through its grounds. Grounds lines of 1, powers of 2, powers of 3, right? That's 3 grounds, right? Okay, setting attractions, all right? So you got a window frame and you got your panel frame. Okay, you got your digits and setting lines of travel. Okay, there's your phone. Okay, you already know how your phone is created, right? But then you have to understand the mass and the volume and the frequency. Okay, how your phone comes in all indication system of its own concept, its own awareness, and lines of travel, and set position location of its grounds. There's a hologram, right? So you turn your phone into a hologram. So you're synchronizing the facades. You're changing the facades to change the time as measured. Now it's a grid, right? All right, so get in that position. You come into the settings. Then we come to security, over sequence, over lines of communication, right? Then we come into blue, which is blue is plasma. That's protecting its screen adaptation system, its holographic system. Then we come into cloak and dagger, with just 3 grounds of settings of travel, inside rotation. And then we take it out. All right, it comes out. And then you just see the grid. You don't see the box frame, you just see the grid. And then you put it back in. So, and then you can add colorations, you can add volume, you can go through 12 sequence, because you guys have already done this in equation, right? So you're just adding volume to the grid, right? And then you add the waves, which is your human resonance. That's ripple effect. This crosses lines of signals, lines of communications, yardage, width, length, longitude, latitude. Process that position of metric meters of scale that correlates the system at time and travel. All right, so you have to stand the ground lines, just the grid line communications and settings. How a phone turns into an actual ground itself, right? That's doing it through its own consciousness. So what you have to start identifying is actually how to see a grid of what you already created in the AVR system, not in the story frame. So everything comes in sequence, comes in balance. Now we go in grid locks, at greens, and set lines of communication, right? And now we're going to have it come out. Okay, we'll have it come out in sequence, red signals. Let's get in orange signals and travel. Okay, it's coming out now, see? All right, so now this is coming in mass and volume. It gets much easier to travel. And that position location system. See, it's coming out now, see? Okay, and it gets much easier. So I'm just doing line signals one at a time so you understand the position location and settings. Where you're clocking zeros, everything lines every hour on the hour goes back to 0. And once you understand that through a computer, then you understand how a computer goes on and off at the same time. It's like turning on a light switch, but as you go faster, you're doing it all at once. But if you're not conscious of what you're doing with your thoughts, action, emotions, you're not going to understand how to come into adaptation of a construct to an infrastructure of your blueprint, how to create it through a formula of equation and create it through a hologram of a map. Okay, and that's why everything goes back to 0 until you understand the process, how to get in the grounds, the panels, and its ceiling, just to create a box of triangulation. And then you create the outer structure that creates the inner structure of the characters and the players that you bring inside the game. Okay? Setting a sequence. And then we change the communication setting to time. Right? All right? And it's all pixelation inside the TV box frame. All right? So let's get in online centers. I set the course centers to blue. And let's get in blue, and let's get into blue, and let's get into blue and travel. Okay? And set position. All right? And then we go into high lines of surface and grab communications. Right? Different levels of settings, right? So this is copy pasting this line screen adaptation to flexing on screen. Process indication, we can override the sequence into black of space. Okay, and we bring it in red, overline channel, overline panel, overline calculation setting. Set actions. So that's what you created through hologram, all through a grid. And that's how you see a grid. Okay? So you see the grids of the grounds, you see the grids of the panels, and you see the grids of the ceiling. And you also see the grids of the set position, all right? Now you can change tractions. Remember, you have a 4-line signal, 4 setting, position, location, measure, and scale, all right? Change the angles, change the points, change the graphs, change the structure. Now it's a pyramid, okay? So you're constantly changing things, connecting the dots and signals, okay? Now I'm working with inside. Right, it's now working inside, right? Now you see the panels of inside travel and all communication. See, you're seeing the inside now, right? And then we change the operation set location, right? Change core lines of time lines of setting. Process 0-point lines of graph communication system. Look at that instruction, right? But you create the out structure as setting the pixelation graphs, right? Understanding how to put cement blocks, retro blocks, anything that's structured design, like building blocks, you know, building a tower. Okay? And then just this length and width. This is the volume and mass. Okay? That's the mass, right? There's the grid. Okay? Very simple, right? So when you're building blocks, you change it in an angle. Now you see the hologram. Setting the grounds, sequence, panels, operations, surface. Okay? All right, so if you want a platform going down, you process the angles of 45 communications. All right? Downshift lines of anomaly. Okay? So you got line, position, locations, and setting. We got, here's the building, looking down in sequence. Right? There's the building, right? And then we can change the point graphs and setting lines of travel. So you guys are on your moons now. And travel communications. Directions, right? This is the sequence lines of communication. You can change the setting, right? And then you can color it in. Let's color it in purple. Okay, it's all purple. Line crossing screens and set travel. Zero calculation, start with the A, B's, and C's and travel. Okay? And then we go in red, and we go in triangulation, color it in, and setting. All through set position. Traction. Okay? And then we go through the fencing of communication. Right? Changes different colors. Let's get into green. Setting sequence. Green, 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 green. Right? Now, this doesn't look like green, but it's green. All right? Because I changed the green. But you see it as pink. Okay? So we have to change the modification system all through travel. All through setting, all through operation. Okay? It's amazing how you can change anything in color and information lines of setting. All through its holographic system, all through travel. Okay? All right. And then you go in this way, and you look at this angle and set traction. Right? So I'm just showing you how powerful it is of what you guys already created in your minds in your AVR system. Okay? It's much easier to understand that. All right, so then you come to your formula equations. Now, it gets complicated because it's everything connected as 0 to 3, 3 to 0, right? So let's get in position of power. Okay, so we got 4 atmospheres of A's in travel. Okay, setting sequence in position over B. Let's travel its communication setting over C and equals lines into question and traction. Okay. Now, directing lines of signals over lines of A lines, process line position over D, X line platform and travel. Okay? Fortitude, screen adaptations of window frames and travel. Okay, so basically, it's understanding how to create it through its structure of design of its outline. That's its outline from its inline, all right? So I'm creating the outer structure of its hologram inside rotation, okay? But you create it through a formula. So the position location puts everything in tractions of balance. Now you can change the signals, okay, into the blocking screens of communication, okay? And then we can change the angles and direct signals in line communication, all through its avatar set tractions, okay, in direction, right? All right, so every time you're line signaling, you're docking your systems. Docking 1, docking 2, docking 4, docking 6, docking 8, and docking center of 12. That puts me in the foundation grounds of Hotel Golf of Uniform, Papa Uniform. Sets communication grounds and highlines as settings, highlines as surface and travel communications. Different structures of design line, but you have the outline and you have the inline set application, its hologram itself, right? So you're out structuring the structure of the building inside the traction of the building itself, right? So that's how you create a holographic grid in set position of a structure of a building in a hologram, okay? All right, that's just basic 4-line. And it's all modified in set position lines of travel, okay? So you're constantly changing the ruler at different angles, right? You look at a box screen, there's a box, right? And you'll have a level here to level it out, right? There's a level to balance out the frame, right? But what you have to understand, you're on north, east, west, and south in seconds, minutes, and hours in future adaptation now, okay? So you're constantly changing it from this angle. You start with that angle, right? And then we change it on this angle, right? So the box is this angle now in travel, okay? See, it's working inside, right? And then we go on this side, we go direct and redirect, right? So we change it on this angle in set position. So we're expanding the longitude of the position location of Hotel Golf now. Okay, longitude and then streaming in set position, right? And then we get into the grounds, right? So we get ground settings in location with systems. There's the holographic structure. Boom. And then you color it in, right? All right, so it's inside and outside, right? And then we have the wall sequence of the ceiling. There's the house inside. So I'm trying to get you guys to understand how this is all created from inside and line centers to a box frame communication setting through 4 indication setting northeast, west, and south. So it indicates grounds. Now the high lines volume and mastering communication system is all through tractions. The 3 centers of 3 travels. Mass and volume, okay? In that position location measure. Change communication lines and expanding overline communication setting to your pyramid and traction. Okay? All right, so once you get in that position locations, you keep involving yourself in that position location system. So once you get into that lines, you can change the communication lines of time and sequence. You can expand, okay? And when you change the angle, you change the structure of the schematics of its primer. It's something else. It's at a different angle, right? When you create a structure of a building, you only see it one setting, right? But what you understand, when you're creating a structure, you're seeing it in all 4 settings all at once. That's what's crazy about it. You're seeing it at all different angles. So you see it on a 4-line flush or a 6-line angle, or you see it on a 9-line flush or a 12-line angle. So it's about understanding how to adapt to your holographic setting to your levels of your engineering skills through a blueprint. Your constructs, your communication setting to your infrastructures, gets in position at all levels of its rack location, knowing exactly how to create from the inside and outside of its structure of its holographic system. Okay? And that's just through a box. Look what you created through a box. And then you color it in. Like I said, color in the blue. We'll just do the grounds and setting sequence. Now you have to understand the tones that you put in line setting, pixelation grounds, and setting. There's the grounds. Okay? Okay, and set lines of angles, set lines of travel. Let's put it all in blue. Okay, so you have 3 angles of points. This is where you come into formula equations, your alphabetical system. You can do inventories, you can do letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols in settings. Okay, it's coming together, right? So there's a reason why I took perspective in drawing. You guys are your own engineers. You have tool sets. Now you just truly understand how to put it together, right? Once you guys get in your AVR system, you have to understand that you created this, but it's created through a hologram in set traction scales. Okay? There's the structure. Okay? All right. So if you ever took perspective drawing, it's much easier to see it on all different angles. See, we're focused on one surface. We see one structure, but then we got to go around to see the other structure, and then we got to go around to see the other structure. But in set position, your inner line, your outer line, inner line, you're seeing in and out at the same time. So you're seeing inside and outside at the same setting, in set position. Now, to understand how you see things through perspective is knowing exactly how you see through all volume and mass. It's dimensional layers of space and travel, right? And then once you come to that, then you can create the volume and set position. Okay? So I'm just showing you how powerful it is, what you guys have to start identifying. Okay, you're just creating the mass of what you already created through hologram. Understand the A, B's, and C's, you know, how to use your tool sets, all through your engineering skills and setting travel, right? All in that communication system, right? All through tractions, all directions. And we'll color this in red. Okay. It's very powerful when you come in that position to its settings, all through communication, right? Okay. See the triangulation that way and that way. So, you know, it gets much easier when you just get grounds with a box or triangulation, or let's get in a 5 setting line position of a star setting. Let's get in a star. Everything I could turn a 4 into a holographic city. So this is what you're always coming into position location systems, right? 5 settings, center lines of 1, 2, 4, 6, and 8 travel. Okay. Now you see this, right? That's all you see. But what you have to see is the circulation and its rotation. You see it all the way. Circulation, rotate. You're seeing inside and outside at the same time. So you don't have to look at a structure here. You're looking at the structure all the way around just by standing there. You're seeing it at all different angles of direction. And that's what it is in setting. All right? So the actual star itself comes out of itself in traction. It comes in volume, right? And then you take it out through its equation. Okay? You take it out. And it travels on its own system of its own consciousness, from its awareness. Okay? So, anything with letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols coming into all line, center line condition setting with a computer operation system, all through the operators that you are. Now, you guys are your own compliant setting lines of travel that puts all communication system in balance. Process your position locations, how you direct and redirect your set location setting to your CPU. Knowing how to use that in line screen adaptation. So you understand the grounds of a hologram. Okay? Now you understand the panels. Okay? And now you understand the ceiling. Okay? That's all it is. 2 panels, 1 ceiling, 1 ground. Okay? But you have to indicate the formula equations. If I look at my phone, this is my phone, right? Okay? That's my phone, right? But it has an edging screen, right? This is set position of process communication. Starts with that setting, right? I only see it on that angle. But actually see the phone itself, you got to see it in platforms of setting to travel. Okay? You've got to see it in platforms of travel. That's the phone, right? And then it has its open window. There's the phone, right? So this is 3 lines of angles, process lines, dimensional door setting. This is flux and center, 2 dimensional lines of space and time of travel. Okay? So it's getting more complicated, right? What your phone sees and how you see your phone. And when you get into that, you come into mass and volume of all line positions. And then you come into, what do you have? The grid. There's the grid, right? So I'm turning the phone this way, and now you're seeing the grid, right? You're seeing the panel. You're seeing the road. And 3 indication system of travel. Interesting, right? And then you see the communication system inside and outside. You're seeing inside and outside the phone, right? So it's that position here, here, and here's the face facades and travel. Indirect signals of grounds of communication system of the calculation. Coming out of the phone, of conception, of its mind, of interpretation, right? Into high lines of ceiling in travel communications. That's all through my phone, right? right? But it's amazing how you see it in lines of communication, okay? And then you basically look what I'm creating. I'm actually creating a box frame, and I'm creating a circulation frame and travel communication frame, okay? This is all through my phone. So this is what my phone shows me if I want to get a tour in position, know exactly what's going on in its seconds, minutes, and hours, and future adaptation of its frames. Know exactly how I'm come into that platitude. It's that position here, the 3 settings of 4 settings, lines of travel, directing 4 lines of ground lines of communication, lines of travel, all through a phone. All through a phone, guys. That's what a phone does in set position when you're looking at it. Okay, it's traveling on its own system. So understanding mass is truly understand that, and same with letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols. Numbers get complicated because you're in digital forms now, so it's about understanding the A tracks, the V centers, C lines into DX. You got an X platform and position lines into all levels of T interaction. All right? Okay, that's all position at all levels of letters, right? So how do you modify that? Well, you get positional lines, you have balance of communication settings, 3 on standby, okay? So formula equation comes from inside line conditions, but understand the 4 calculation setting to its grounds, its panels, and its ceiling, okay? So you have 2 panels, 1 ground, 1 ceiling, right? And then you work with inside travel, in set position. You work with inside, okay? Inside and outside. Okay, inside and outside, guys. Okay, inside, outside, inside, outside, inside, outside. Okay? There you go, right? There's 1. There's a hologram and set tractions. There's an energetic dome and set traction. Okay? And there's another energetic dome. Another one, another one, and another one in process communications. Okay? So the more you understand that, the more you understand how to see in perspective. And how you see through perception. You're seeing massive volume of multi-layers of interdimensional space and time through the conscious awareness of what you're looking at. It's structure itself, right? So that's what you have to get out of focus, is out of story frame. Because it's constantly changing its frames, it's constantly changing its time, it's constantly changing its measure and scale, it's constantly changing its operation of its intelligence, it's constantly changing its facades. It's never in the same shape every time you look at it, because it's protecting its system from everything else until everybody wakes up to that dream itself, which is not a dream at all. And that puts all lines of all communications in balance, how you come into that position location to its settings, interactions. But it's all levels of perspective, how you see things, right? And all lines of all communication inside and out, okay? Because when you see a building, okay, set position locations and setting, start with a tree. That's all you see. You don't see anything else, right? But the tree itself is massive volume of its own system of travel. Okay, it platitudes its system. That's massive volume right there. So you see everything in mass and you see everything in volume that comes together in travel. That's the tree, right? And then you got the electrical wires trickling down into all lines of its earth itself in rotation. Okay, that's a tree. And then you see the pixelations, box centers, frame communication settings. Then you put the zeros and ones. Then you put the questions. Then you put your graphs, flash drive, flash interference, high traffic communication, high settings. There's the tree. Boom, pixelation. Okay? And then it comes into volume. Then it comes into its position of its wormhole, of where it's coming in position of the setting. Process of communication, right? There you go in setting. Look at that. Different structure, different design. Different structure, different design, right? It's coming out, right? So it's 4 sequence lines of communication of different facades and line, position, location, of future adaptation of seconds, minutes, and hours of clocking. So we have to truly understand how this all works. I showed you the grounds, the 2 panels, and the ceiling. Start with the box. Then you start with the triangulation of 3. Then you work with the 4 outside setting, okay? And then you work inside line conditions, attractions. Whoa, okay? That's what it is, inside and out at the same time. But you have to set up the flux because the flux changes lines of time. Changes all communication system all through tractions, right? But you see the inside, but you also see the outside at once, right? So you're looking this way, but you're looking from inside and outside of everything, all different angles, and in position and setting, Okay? Circulation and rotation. Okay? Now, once you get grounded with that, it's much understanding how to use that through indication system all through its hologram. Right? 0, 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3. Let's just start there, right? So you're clocking hour, hour, and hour in between, right? Hour, 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 right? So every hour goes back to 0. Every hour goes back to 0. Goes back, okay? And there it is. There's the Schumann resonance. Then you go through waves of 6 over 7, travels point lines of 6 over 5, alpha, delta, and theta. Booyah. Okay? Now, once you understand that, you have to understand your platforms of communications. Okay? Crossing angles in flux over screen. Okay? Now, understanding that in structure, you can create anything you want, lines of setting, but you have to process in all different levels of communications, all 4 different angles all at once, right? And then we have 45 split lines of anomaly in travel communications. Okay? And then we get into wall sequence, into floor mats in travel communications. There it is. Boom. All right? Now, once you get into this, it's much easier to come into this. There's the sun. Right? There's the sunrise. Okay? And here's you looking at the sunrise in set position. Okay? So, you all understand the outline structure of its box frame. Everything's a box frame. Everything's a box triangulation frame. Everything's a triangulation box. You have to box it in because that's what you're seeing. Everything you see is pixelated in a hologram. But I'm just showing you how you create the grounds, the panels, and the ceiling first. And once you get into that, you come into all lines of different lines of structure, of design, of schematics. There's the moon. See? See the moon? See the eyes? That's the moon. Right? There's the moon. There's the eye of the moon, right? Overlooking the system. Okay? All right? If I change it again, what do we have in traction? Different structure, different schematics. Okay? Change it again. Set lines of communication. Okay? So, start seeing everything in a 4 angle, 6 lines of flux, or 9 lines of angles, or line communication setting. Barometers, thermometers, high set, of course, centers, lines of travel. So anything lines of set position. Pyramid setting, outside, right? But everything is done from inside travel. Okay, everything is done from inside travel. Okay, inside. Okay, and then you get your structure of design line and structure of communications. So you work with inside setting. Security panels, communication with system. Change flux screens, adaptations of flux. All right. Modify ground centers, high lines of ceiling, and set position of surface. Okay, angle point lines of grounds, energize. Platitude lines, temperature reading, screen adaptation. Right? Process indicate lines, 3 grounds, 3 surface, 3 travels, 3 points, point line centers, high communication setting, travel. Okay, and then we go gridlocks, 45 angle split lines, cross angles of communication system of floor mats. There's the floor mat and travel communications. Okay, all through hologram. So every time I'm doing something, you can see the XT1000 now, right? And then I'm in the center. I'm being energized into the pod in set position. Okay? So I came from this platform here, out of this portal. You come into your story frame of existing, right? It's a constant flow of you coming into your existing, of your own narrative, of your own system, but not through a story of you, of existing, not in position of a story itself that has no existence. The no existence is all levels of existing itself, knowing you're already in set position, but knowing how to set up the gridlocks, the power lines, and the atmosphere line position. To see yourself in the schematics lines of primer and of course centers location of 4 indicates and setting of circulation rotations and set tractions. Circulation and rotation. Okay? And then you can see it on all different angles. See? Different platform, right? Now I'm going in this levels instead of travel. So it's like Tron, right? How you basically see the grids. Now, remember how you look this way in setting? And how you look this way in setting? And then you come into this, right? And then you come into this, and you come into this, right? And then you come into this. See, I'm just starting basic here. And then I cross the angles, okay? And then I get the ground centers. Then I get the positions of its panels and travel, okay? But you see the teleportation vessel in the center, right? And then you see the energize of communication, right? And then you formulate every lines of indication setting, every line, every dot, every signal, every modification in the line position has to be measured in scale, has to be balanced. There's the intelligence. So perspective is basically understanding how to paint by number, setting lines of travels in 8-line sequence. You've got an A-line centers back in 0, set positional clocking centers into 48 gaps, sets 4 lines of travels, 3 lines of measure, 2 lines of scale. Okay, set communication system of the calculations. Okay, doesn't look like much, but I know exactly what you're doing as you're turning it into a holographic system. Okay, so we take the E factors over 1 over A, process lines of indication setting over track over 2, set grounds lines of 1 over sequence. Process in that position all line, direct and redirect, flashing drive line, course centers line, electrical grid line, screen adaptation systems, all through intelligence. There's the brain. Okay? So there's nothing you can't do in the mind. You just have to understand how to construct its setting location system and understand its grid line of patterns and process of communication system of the calculations. But it's incredible when you really understand what you're doing in all settings, right? So that's what the team has to come into positions. All right, so we got 41 line centers, outline sequence, outline positions, back in traction. You guys are back. Hope you guys had fun. All right, so that's going to circle line rotation 1 center. Okay, circulation of propellers in 3 centers. Okay, 2 travels in position. There's Pluto. Okay, change the angle. There's Pluto on a different angle. Okay, there's Pluto on a different angle. See, it's constantly traveling all at once, right? It's a constant continuous force that never stops traveling itself. Okay, now once it travels faster, it changes times lines of scales of clocking. Okay, changes timelines of scales and metric meters of clocking. Changes rotation spin cycles, line communication lines, and calculations of clocking. Then it comes line position. Let's change communication setting, direct signals, ground centers of surface. Now you're in the communication setting. Earth tone line 1, cycle line center location setting, your planet, and set lines of sequence. There's your planet. Boom. Okay? Bring it in inside line and set line connections. Okay? All through graph, off the screen, off the calculation. Okay? That's what you got to do. Look inside position. Everything you see in structure. Everything you see in structure. Everything you see in structure. Okay? Because that's your simulation. That is your road. That is your graph. That is the line communication system off the setting. So like, right? That's all it is. That's how you look at things, right? From above, from below. That's all you bring in, right? Setting lines of sequence processes communication lines of angles. Now there's a 4-point graph line that has a line screen adaptation setting, how to use the tool sets. Knowing exactly how to understand how many tools do I have in my set. Okay, so I basically have vice grips, I have a hammer, I have a nail. What do I do with that? What do I use with the vice grips? Well, vice grips is basically to hold things, right? So we can tighten the knot. So we have to trace in the basic rounds, how to use that in an line screen adaptation system. Process lines of indication, lines of flux over screen adaptation and travel communications. Okay? Okay, so how do we get in position all that and turn it into a ground grid? Process lines, platforms over sequence, 3 grounds of settings, and 3 travels and point communication system and travel. Okay? Now, we go through the divots and transitions, outline signal, inside rotation. Okay? And then we plan it in setting a holographic screening and rotation location to a barometer that changes communication lines of ground. So the center communication setting goes in this central system that creates the energetic dome. Okay? Very complicated stuff, guys, but it's all through hologram, right? So you plan it in that position, and that's where it turns on the charge of mechanism lines of its compass. The process of having communication setting, let's like turning on a light bulb, lines its signal location to its graph and all direct signal location to its system. There's the energetic dome. Okay? All right, then you cross the angles and set traction. Okay? Look at that, and set positions, all through operation. Okay? Solar sail, travel pin, position lines of travel. You are in the center. See? Panel screens adaptation. Eye division. This is your eye in sequence. There's your eye in sequence. Okay, setting lines of parameters. The more imagination you come in your core, it changes core centers, lines of travel, and direct lines and communication system all through calculations. All through traction, right? High signal lines of grounds, high lines of surface and travel. Okay? So you just have fun with it. But, position lines of setting back to earth locations. Right? So perspective is everything. Okay? Understanding how you see things through a construct, how you see things through a blueprint. Right? But you have to understand the outer house before you understand the inner house. So once you work inside, okay, things get much easier of what you're doing. Okay? You understand what you're doing in flux. Okay? Of what you're doing in panels of changing operation. Changing operation. Changing operation. Okay? All through setting, all through traction. Right? So once you get into that, you're just connecting the dots. That's all you're doing. Okay? And then you create the platforms inside travel. Okay? And then you create the location grids inside rotation. And then you create the line screen adaptation to setting. And then you process travels in that communication system, inside setting, right? And then you create the outline rotation, inside rotations, outline rotation, inside rotation. Okay? And then you create the platforms inside outline communication. Right? So it's basically understanding how to work all this align position, location, hologram, guys. How you create everything to your system and see it through structure of its pixelation. Right? How to modify the grounds, the powers, and the atmospheres, the highways, the modems, the satellites, and the towers. Let's get in position, locations, and setting. Working with cars, very simple. You see the structure line and construct. Okay, that's one graph and 3 grounds. One graph and 3 grounds, right? 4 grounds in setting. Okay? That's 4 grounds in setting. And then you got position lines of 2 wheels, and then you got in position inside line connections to the other 2 wheels and travel. Okay? So you can have the car going this way, and you can have the car going the other way in the opposite direction. That's direct and redirect in setting 1. Right? So we process the indication system, we copy and paste, and we change the angles of its point graph communication. So we do this, and we do the opposite direction and set tractions. Okay? It's very complicated. So you see one car, one go direction, the other car, the other direction, same car, right? All right. Or a different car, different colors of a car, right? Different colors of time. So to process that and that position locations, then you take the wheels in process of communications, right? And then it goes into its platforms of calculation, all right? And once you get into that, then you take the mass and volume of the cars going in all directions all at once, in different directions, right? All through travel, all through communication. Okay? All right? Okay? So you're seeing a car, but you're also seeing the number 7. Right? See? It's amazing when you start seeing these things in travel. Okay? But then you see the grids, and then you can change the formations of its car into a grid. Now it's a grid, right? And then you can process anything in structured design. But you have to stand the metric meters of scale of what you're doing in travel communications. Okay? Knowing how to set it up, guys. Okay? That's the arrows of indication going in that way or out that line communications, right? Understand the inversion, outer version, inversion, right? In and out, in and out, in and out, all at the same time, right? And we change the angles. Look at that in traction. Okay, process that communications. Let's get in travel communication as settings. Directing ground centers. Okay. People sitting down. I love this part. Sitting down in travel. It's amazing how you can change the metric meters of scale of communications. So it's incredible what you can do in your mind, how you constantly change the structure of design. It's absolutely incredible when you come into that position. All through traction, all through calculation. Right? All right? All right, so start out with the basics of communications. But it's amazing how you see two cars in two different directions, how you set up a grid and its holographic city. Or you can set up its towers. Okay? So it's line directing. Okay, I understand the arrow indicates from this to that. Okay, or this to this. You change it. You change the direction. Okay, so you know exactly what you're doing next in travel. And then you change it again. Only change it if you want to change it. Because all you're doing is you're sending lines of its clocking system that changes timelines of scales and future adaptation of existing all at once. That's all you're doing, right? You're changing the grids. You're changing rotation spins of travel communications. All through traction, right? All through directions. All through setting. All through operation, right? So, start with the basic grounds. You start with the alphabetical line, signal locations, letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols. So when you come into numbers, you come into 0 into 12, and then 12 into 24, into 48. Split it up, setting lines of settings, and position lines of paint by number. Okay, 144 attractions setting, right? Each one's a different color. Let's start with that setting. Start with black, is 0. Okay, that's truth narrative. Okay, that's a truth narrative, right? Let's get into false narrative. Okay, false narratives, line signal locations of blue. 144 is one false narrative, right? Let's get into 12 signals is green. And center lines of travel, false narrative, right? And let's get into gold. 72 is truth narrative and setting. Okay, so you're following truth and false at the same time. Same measure, same scale, just different frequencies. Let's get into 24 of set position of pink. Okay. And let's see, in sequence, 48 comes and travels into orange as sequence, into false narrative. Okay, now this is paint by number. Now, how you want to set that up, you'll have to line signal it first, right? They all have to come together because it's all different levels of consciousness of frequencies. So we line signal location, line centers, set position of 3 centers and 3 travel. All right, and then we go 4 lines into 2 travel. Okay, and then we set lines of 1/2 into position of 4 travel. And then we set positional location of 7/2 over line setting. And then we process the indication lines over cross location of 4 over cross lines of 8 in travel communications. Okay, now you have to look at it on a 4 different angle setting. There's the pyramid. There's the pyramid. Okay, now you got the pyramid in one setting. Ground centers of 1, 2, and 3 lines and 4 lines of platforms that set traction. Okay, and then we got to change the panels and position of all line electrical fencing. Set position all levels, cross lines of 1 over cross lines of 2, center operation lines of 3 travel. Sets communication high centers, overline signal location system all through above. Process the indication ground centers of service, process the center point line communication. Then we change the angles of all communication setting all through travel. Okay? So in that position location, you come in platforms over line, triangulation lines, box frame, and line rotation setting of window frame and travel communications. Okay? And you have a direct line link that processes communication setting of travel. Okay? Then you get into schematics, you have the primer circuits and 3 centers of travel. Okay? And then you cross the angles on 4 line communication lines of travel. And then you indicate the ground centers of service locations of 4 lines of communication lines and angles of travel. And then you get in communication center, line center locations in that position location of systems of the calculations. Okay? And then you get sequence lines. If you're sending up line, you got to say ground line service. So process of communication lines, all dimensional doors have to be 4 angles that set lines of sequence. Okay? And then you get in position lines of travel, indirect signal lines of grounds of surface and travel. Okay? So once you get into that, it's much easier to kind of go through truth and false narrative, what you're doing in travel communications. So you're painting by number, right? So let's say orange lines in sequence, orange is set up. So we have orange over lines into triangulation system. Okay, we go through the orange setting in sequence right here in travel. Okay, right there. And you set up the laser tractions first. You don't color it in. You don't color it in right away because it's off its position of time, measure, and scale. So you start with the orange line track and triangulation, and then you come into the blue lines of service and overcross the screens and set position of center communications. They have to connect with each other. All right, and then you get into all lines gold. Gold connects to the orange, and gold connects to the black of center operation. Okay? Now, we have to get in position lines of high centers, configuration lines of greens, overcross lines of blue over setting that sequence. Okay, in that position, now we add line setting position location lines of pink. Pink overrides the system in black over screen adaptation. Okay, and then we have them in set lines of travel. There's the schematics of screen adaptation node systems with all the calculations. Okay, all set up through truth and false narrative, through coloration. Turn it into a pixelation grounds, 2 panels, and a ceiling line position of box frame, and a triangulation screen adaptation of flux. There's the schematics. All right, so you're constantly changing set position. There's the road graph. There's the hologram setting location. All right, now you can color it in because it's locked in signal. Let's get it pink. We're going to color it in all line signal and set position. Stay within the line settings, guys. Don't go outline signal. Stay within the set location inside. Set a solid graph screen, directing lines of grounds and pixelation lines in one sequence, one panel, one screen line adaptation to the flux. Color all line course centers and formulate equations that sets line communication setting of arrows of indications. All through directions, all through direction. Okay? This is where you come in position lines of panel. Process of communications. All through solid, all setting in position of a hologram. Booyah. Change the angle. What do you see? Change the angle. What do you see? Face recognition. All right? All right. Now I can process that position over cross lines and create the full face of recognition of time frame. Bring in the full figure of its face recognition of time. Okay? Check this out. So I'm changing the course centers. I'm copy and paste everything lines that embedded, implanting its system lines of face recognition system at trial. Oh, look at that. Disappeared. See, you guys are not ready in frequency. See, this is what you have to constantly be aware of. Don't set anything of emotion because it changes everything in structured design lines. You have to start all over again into clocking lines of 0. Back in 0, back in line position, all tractions. Okay? Hooah. Full figure of a face recognition. Okay? Looking in all directions of your setting. You inside of operation. See? That's you inside in operation. Whoa! Okay. Let's bring the eye line sequence. Eye centers of travel. Center course centers. There's the eye. Boom. Ah! Whoa. So it's you controlling you into a face recognition. Created through lines of screen adaptation with flux over the line. Oh, it's gone. The eye's gone. Where did it go? It disappeared. Got to bring it back in. There it is. You weren't ready to see it in travel. Now you are. Okay? See what you can do through Intel, how you create a face, all through construct location setting through hologram. Hooah! And you can see it on different angles, see? It's you inside, controlling everything. You are the operator that's controlling everything in space-time in your modification setting, your AVR. All through traction, all through locations. Okay? And if you look really close, you can see it's all levels of your eye. Whoa! It's the eye itself. All right, so it's the Intel, the eye itself. So it's set position of grounds, high lines of service, set position locations, set attractions, set directions. There's the eye. Boom. All right, and set course centers of blue. Your eyes are blue. Okay. Oh, blue disappeared. Let's try again. Oh, there it is. All right. All right. And let's add a little bit of line position location, a little bit of white. Top center location. All right. And you got float over here, float over here, float over here. Inside the eye. All right. See? Isn't that amazing, guys? All through that set locations, all through structure, all through design. Another version of the eye itself, all through traction. On different angles of communications, right? Looking the other way, right? So now you understand how powerful it is and what you can do through your mind. Have conceptual location, turn it into a hologram, into its intelligence, inside the eye itself, in all position location setting, all direct location to its setting. Whoa! All right. But we start with its lines and position location travel first. Basic grounds, powers, and atmospheres lines. Two cars going in the same direction. Now, in that position locations, you can change the coloration lines of time, measure, and scale. But you have to understand the tool sets and how to put this all together and travel, right? Instructions to the system.
I didn't go to the bank.
All right. Setting panels, operation lines, and settings. This operates the signal location system all through setting. So let's get a triangulation to flux over screen. 3 centers of travel. Okay? 3 centers of travel. Okay? 3 centers of travel inside. Okay? 3 centers of travel inside and outside. Okay? Change the angle. See the triangulation spinning, right? Look at the platforms. There's the platforms it's setting right now in sequence location. Okay? Then you see the triangle open up, and then you see the triangle open up. It's that position. All right? Now, this is just a rough draft, but what you're seeing is what you want to understand from inside and outside. You see all communication with division, inside traction. Okay? So, hope you guys had fun. I know I did. That was amazing. And that position location. See you guys in 5.